It's Thursday, June 6th, 2024, and you're watching the MMA Eco live podcast. Hey, I'm pumped to be with you guys today. My name is Chris Presnell, owner of MMA Ecosystem. Also work for Tapology. I've worked for lots of MMA publications in the past. I know those of you that have been on the show a lot wonder, why are you telling us this again? But for the new folks who may not know who I am, if this is your first time ever seeing my content, that's a little bit of what I do. And of course, I focus on the Asian MMA scene, exclusively Asian countries, East, Southeast, a little bit of Central Asia, South Asia. That's my focused MMA. We got a lot going on this weekend. It is both a zesty weekend here in Portland, Oregon, and also on the MMA scene internationally. We got UFC, got WKG, one championship, got one Pride MMA, JCK, lots of great stuff. I'll touch on bits of it in today's show. Also, we'll have just some little bits of news, some updates on various things as well. So we got a lot to cover. I'm not going to waste any more time. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already. Give a thumbs up on the video. Drop your questions throughout the show. I want to first talk about the one show tomorrow evening. I've talked at length about the double booking thing and why I feel like this is a really important show for one championship, even though they lost their original main event of Stamp Fairtex versus Denise Sambawanga. I think it's still a pretty big show. They've got a lot of notable things going on, and it's interesting because actually two of the notable things in two of the four MMA fights feature not just the one championship debut, but the pro debut of several of two pretty notable fighters, both for very different reasons. For Cade Rutolo, who is a grappling champion at one championship, he's making his MMA debut, and it's pretty much impossible to gauge how these things are going to go beforehand when we don't have literally 1 second of MMA footage of this guy in the cage or the ring, what have you. All we can really gauge, looking back on previous jiu-jitsu competitors when they make their MMA debuts, usually there's a lot of success early on in their career when they're fighting lower level guys, and then it can be hit or miss past then. There haven't been a lot of like really big there's obviously a lot of great grapplers, a lot of great ADCC jiu-jitsu world champions that go into MMA, but fighters that really like stay in the lane of jiu-jitsu for a long time, and then transition to MMA, kind of talking about like your gosh, I'm blanking on his name, Gary Tonin, guys like that have made the transition over to MMA. Usually, and even you can throw in like Mackenzie Dern in there, they'll have some success for a while, but very few of them have actually made it to like the elite championship level. So Cade, we'll see if he's different. He's still a young guy. Some of these fighters make the transitions later in their career, either in their prime or later. So he's making it a little bit earlier. So that'll be interesting to see. And also if his schedule is going to be going back and forth between MMA and grappling, he still does hold a belt. So, is he going to fully transition to MMA? Perhaps he said whether he is or isn't, and I just haven't kept up with interviews, but I'll be interested to see that. There's really no way of knowing how he's going to do. I imagine he'll probably do well for his first couple fights. He may probably get some favorable matchmaking for him. And then once he fights some of the bigger guns, we'll have to see if he can make it there. The other debut, which I almost don't really even want to talk about it because, is Adrian Lee. And the reason I don't really want to talk about it is just because the only reason we're talking about it is because he's a sibling of these other two fighters, which have done very well for themselves in one already, both Angela and Christian, and Victoria as well. She did very well as long as she competed there. So and we've heard good things about Adrian from his siblings so far, saying that he's the most talented of the four of them. But we'll have to see. I mean, there's a lot of things that go into an MMA debut. They're handing him a guy named Blake Cooper. Don't really know anything about him. I don't really know how to break down the fight. I don't really know what to expect. But that is on the radar. It's going to be something that people look at. Although I feel like, and we've talked about this at length, even like giving people a spotlight, talking about it can sometimes like propel them into a position with the organization that where there's a lot of eyeballs on them, there's a lot of pressure, and that can come too early, too quick. And so for that fight, I'll just have to say, let's see what happens. We've also got Denise Zamboanga versus Noelle Grandjean. This seems like it should be a Zamboanga win. The fight came together when Stamp dropped out, and then they brought in Noelle Grandjean, who fought just over a month ago, about 34 days ago, which was also a loss. So I'm expecting that this will probably be a fairly one-sided Zamboanga win. But I've always thought that Noelle Grandjean has some good potential. But losing to Sawada last month, I mean, Sawada could definitely be like a future champion in an organization. But yeah, I just feel like they got who they got. They didn't have a lot of options. Atomweight is honestly a really small division and won championship as well. Not a whole lot to say about that fight. The other fight on the card is it's another atomweight fight. It's Itsuki Hirata fighting Victoria Souza. And I like that they're giving Hirata, I feel like for the longest time they were giving Hirata these really big fights against like Hamsohi, and I always felt like they needed to dial it back a little bit. She's dropped 3 of her last 4, hasn't shown a whole lot of improvement fight to fight. And I think it's good that they're stepping back a little bit, finally giving her someone outside the rankings. I don't know how the fight's going to go. If she's, if it's going to be a grappling fight, her wrestling, judo versus Souza's jiu-jitsu. But we'll have to see. I don't have a whole lot to say about that fight either. Really, like the biggest fight on the card was that Stamp versus Zamboanga card. The rest of these fights, all outside the rankings, 2 MMA debuts. A lot of just we'll have to see. The big thing for the event that I'm watching, really even more than just like the winners and losers, is how this will affect 168. Every single fight on 168 in September has a fighter that is double booked on tomorrow night's show. I've never seen anything like that ever in combat sports, where you have pretty much like a whole card where like half the fighters are double booked. And we've talked about why that is, why that's a problem. But the in a lot of ways, it's not really actually a problem. I mean, like you can sign the contracts, book whoever you want. But my issue with it is that fans are buying tickets for Denver with a really, really high likelihood of potentially all the fights that are scheduled so far being canceled. And sure, it does say fight schedule or subject to change, as we've already seen with the main event. Although the ethical problem that I have, because technically that's not really even still like an ethical issue. The ethical issue I have is that one continues to promote 168 as though Stamp versus Xiong Jingnan is still the main event. And I mean, I guess like you could get a doctor to rubber stamp Fairtex to go, but like she just had ACL surgery like 2 weeks ago, and I'm going to say it's impossible to make that kind of recovery. It's impossible. So the fact that you still go to the one's website, they're still promoting the fight like it's happening, is just a way to try to sell as many tickets as possible, and then like cancel the fight later once they've sold more tickets, because they're doing every single trick in the book to try to fill this arena. So that's the major problem I have with double booking, is when you're promoting a fight that's definitely not going to happen. And to be fair, One Championship is not the only organization that has done this. UFC has sometimes promoted fights that have one fighter has publicly come out and said that they won't be able to fight because they're injured. It's still been listed on UFC websites for days at a time. So I do have a problem with that because that seems a little bit disingenuous. Another really interesting thing going on this weekend is this One Pride show. So 2024, the year of co-promotion. And this weekend, we've got a lot more of that. So now we've got One Pride's first co-promotion, and they're doing it over, well, I guess they're doing it just one day. They've got two shows, one on Friday, one on Saturday. And from what I hear, and this unfortunately makes sense with how One Pride rolls, is that the show on Saturday, they're only going to broadcast the top 3 fights, which is pretty disappointing. I don't really know how this is going to work out because they've got, I guess, a single One Pride show that's got anywhere from like 16, 17 fights on it. And then over the next 3 weeks, they break those prelims up into 4 segments. They re-air them as though they're live in the next couple of weeks, which is honestly a pretty good idea. I think if they're not really big fights, it's a great idea. It's a great way to have weekly predictable content in the exact same time slot without having to stage 4 live events. I think it's a great idea. But if they're bigger fights, if they're especially international fights across different time zones, things like that, that's where I think it's a little bit more messy. And I'm guessing what they'll do is between this One Pride show on Friday, which has got 8 fights, and then the show on Saturday, you can see on the screen here on my website, that's probably got 9 fights between those two. Yeah, they'll probably split them up. That makes 17. Probably split both of those up over the next couple of weeks to air them. I will try to find the results. I don't know yet if WLF is going to air these fights live. So I'll try to figure that out, or if they're going to post a recap article, whatever. I don't know if there's some kind of agreement made to try to keep the results secret, or if they feel like their audiences are separate enough to where it doesn't matter. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. I'm guessing tomorrow we're just going to get the top 3 fights, which are pretty good. Some pretty good prospects here. You got Billy Pasalaton fighting. You've got Faisal Lassa against Irme Mode Lee. That's a really good prospect fight. I think both those guys are atom weights. Also got Novin Kaunong against Gideon Monarung on the lighter weight class as well. That's a good one. And then Saturday, this show against China, they've got 9 fighters. I'm always impressed with how quickly WLF can just crank out shows. Like, they used to be pretty infrequent, once every couple months. Then they moved to every month, and now they're like every month plus a co-promoted show. So sometimes 2 per month. And this one, the cost of that is that sometimes the fighters that they put up are not, I would say, their best talent. But in this situation with One Pride, I'm okay with it, just to give Indonesia some good quality wins, I would say. I think overall Indonesia has the stronger team. I don't know who's going to win. The Patalima versus Wutsatsa Bieka fight, that top one, 2 Road to UFC alums. I really like that one. Not sure who's going to take that. I think probably Furman Muharram, the featherweight champion with One Pride, he's probably going to win that fight. Ronald Siahan, the lightweight champion, he shouldn't have any. I don't think you have any trouble at all with Ideragun. Sukma Prawira Aditya, I don't really know much about him, but I think Ichi Abu out of Unbull fight is pretty solid, and so I'm going to take him. Gugun Guzman versus Yang Lean, I think that's another really good one as well. Yang Lean, another Tibetan out of Unbull fight. I don't know. I'm going to say Gugun Guzman, just his experience, his grappling, I think could pose a problem for Yang Lean. Every once in a while, Yang Lean has shown some signs of some really good striking, but I think overall Guzman's going to take that fight. Rama Supandi versus Zhou Jinbo. don't really know there. And then Rio Turto, maybe one of the, outside of Potts and Lima, the best prospect on the card, fighting Yang Wei Chong. I think he should have an easy fight there. He's a 7-0 flyweight prospect. Definitely a guy to watch going forward. And then Mario Satyamirawan against Zhang Qinghe. Probably Zhang there. Zhang, this guy just went to Kazakhstan, fought in the Octagon and WLF co-promoted show back in April and knocked out a Kazakh guy in the main event. So I think it's tough not to pick Zhang Qinghe there. And then the last one, Denny Daffa against Yang Peng Peng. I think Denny Daffa is a solid prospect, and he should win that as well. So overall, I think, let's see, Indonesia, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll take Supandi. I think honestly, Indonesia should take 7 of those 9. So the one I'm stuck on is the Supandi versus Zhou Jinbo fight, but overall, I think Indonesia should take this, especially being on their home soil, having the crowd, all of that. So there you go. There's One Pride 79 that airs on their YouTube channel. Pay $1 a month for it. It's a steal. You get every single broadcast every single weekend, and you'll stay totally plugged into Indonesian MMA. The other thing that I wanted to chat about is Saturday. Saturday is a big event in UFC because you may not think so at first glance. UFC Louisville, out of you got to kind of, in my opinion, not the best main event between Jared Cannonier and Nasruddin Imavov. An okay card. It was this kind of just feels like a run-of-the-mill fight night card from like 2019, 2018, which is fine, totally fine. But why this matters is because Puja Tomar is making her UFC debut. First Indian woman to fight in the UFC. There's really, I don't think many women out of India. I think Puja Tomar is the only one that could be UFC ready. She's gotten some criticism for her record, her 8-4 record, signing the UFC. But personally, I think that she is more ready than a lot of other UFC strawweights are. I'm fine with her fighting in the UFC. Really, even just to see where she's at. Most of her losses are to really good competition in the first couple fights of her career. So I'll defend her there. She trains out of a really good team, and she also improves a lot every single fight. And what I've really seen lately is just really fast hands, good combinations, and powerful punches too. It's an interesting fight against Hayani Dos Santos because Hayani Dos Santos was the atomweight champion at Invicta. And I rewatched her fight today against Talita Alankar in her UFC debut, which she dropped. And she started off strong. She's actually a pretty tall, lanky strawweight, considering that she used to fight at atomweight. And for that, she could give Puja Tomar some problems. Actually, I do actually want to see what the difference of reach is, because I'm imagining them in my mind, but sometimes when you actually compare them, they may not be all that different. Puja has also fought at atomweight as well. Her last several fights, though, have been at strawweight. So Puja's, we don't have her reach yet. I will be the one to enter that this weekend. I'm doing the live UFC results for Tapology. So I'll make sure to enter that. Hayani Amanda Dos Santos has a reach of 62 inches, and she's 5'2". So what I saw from her fight against Talita Alankar is that she had some pretty good counters. She sometimes had some good power, but she was really loopy and really wild. As the fight went on, she kind of tired out a little bit, and just like a lot of atomweights that you might expect moving up a weight class, she got pushed around a little bit in the clinch, on the ground. Her grappling is decent, but against really physical fighters, I think that she suffers a little bit. So Puja Tomar, I think, is a fighter that's in excellent shape. Overall, I'd put her probably in a little bit like give her a few more points in the strength and conditioning category, but and I think that her striking is a lot more clean as well. So I don't know. I think this is a really well-matched fight because it's a fight that I think Puja could definitely win if she can just, defend takedowns, land at a higher clip, land more impactful strikes. I think that she also throws a lot more variety of strikes than Reone dos Santos. Dos Santos, if she gets to the ground, I don't think Tomar's grappling is bad by any stretch, but I think that she could have an advantage there. So also if Reone dos Santos is able to just kind of keep things at range and be wild at range, then she could land some big like uppercuts, overhand rights, that kind of stuff. So that's what I'll be looking for. It's a hard fight to pick. It's pretty even. I probably have a lot more faith in Puja Tomar than many, but I'm still going to pick her just thinking as rationally as I can. The thing about this fight and why it's significant is that to date, and there's only been 2 fights, so this isn't saying much, but to date, still haven't had an Indian fighter win in the UFC. Anshul Jubli was on his way to getting that first win, fighting Mike Breeden, and then the tide just rapidly and quickly changed. So Puja Tomar, I think, could do it. I think this is a great opponent for her. I think that she will probably surprise people. I don't think that she's going to get finished personally, but I'm really looking forward to it. That's the first fight of the UFC Louisville prelims. So catch that on Saturday. Also on Saturday, earlier in the day, we've got Taiyilake fighting a guy named Maxim Shimchenko. I still haven't done any kind of like research into Shimchenko, but I just thought, why don't we just pull up their 2 profiles here and take a look at them together, shall we? So this guy, Shimchenko, Russian fellow with an 8-3 record. His fought as high as middleweight, or at least we have him listed as a middleweight, 30 years old. Not familiar with that gym. Let's take a look at his record and we'll just see what we can gather from it. First of all, you take a look. He's finished 5 of his 8 wins, and 3 of those by TKO, 2 by submission. Looking at his competition, honestly, guys, like you're watching me, like if you don't have time to do tape study, like a full tape study of 2 guys, this is sometimes the best that you can do is try to put the pieces together from their wins and losses. So he's been a pro ever since 2012. Then he took 6 years off. So he has been a fighter for a very long time. So that's definitely an advantage. You look at the fighters that he's fought, though. 0-0, 0-0, 0-0, 3-0, 4-3, 0-0, 2-1, 0-0. He has not fought anybody. Well, I should say his losses come to 3-0, 4-5, 7-2. That was just in his 3rd fight. So he was definitely way overmatched in that fight against this guy. I don't know why that fight would have been made. It's the Russian regional scene. You never know what you're going to get. He did go 3-0 as an amateur, so those matter as well. But overall, has not fought. I would say he has not beaten high quality opponents at all. Granted, some of these, you never know, some of these fighters that he's beat could have gone on to do really good things, and they could be wins that age really well. That's always possible. But overall, he's never been stopped. You see that. And the guys that he's beaten by knockout, not all these guys, 0-0, 0-0, 2-1. So it's hard to guess. I feel like just looking at this record and then looking at Taiyilake's record, it's hard not to pick Taiyilake. I mean, the guy's never been finished. Everyone has a first time for everything. And so it could happen. Taiyilake, as we know, as a finishing machine, just one of the most dangerous guys on the regional scene as a whole. Just 23 years old. Let's take a look at his record. I mean, just finish after finish after finish after finish. Never even been to the final bell. So you have kind of like, you have a guy that's never been finished against a guy that has never been to the judges. Really fun when that happens. I think that Taiyilake is probably going to get a finish. I mean, his last couple fights, he fought Wang Qi, who was a really solid Chinese guy, really good striker, beat him by TKO. Fought Kim Han Sol, who I think a lot of people thought would beat Taiyilake just off of his veteran experience. Beat him with that hellacious elbow round 2 of Road to UFC last year. And then went to go and it goes to Niza, fights this 13-7 Brazilian powerhouse grappler, and makes short work of him in the first round, less than 90 seconds by TKO. So I think probably you're going to see Taiyilake win this just based off of this. Haven't done any tape study on the two, comparing them, but just going off their records, this does not bode well for his opponent. And I expect we'll probably get either a Taiyilake TKO finish, or we'll get a dominant decision win for Taiyilake. So that's on WKG. A lot of people ask, how do I watch that? Usually you can watch that on the M1 Global YouTube channel. They usually stream the fights. If not there, then usually on like WKG social media, which is not necessarily accessible in China only, but it's only on Chinese social media platforms. Taiyilake winning this fight, I don't know how you don't punch his shot into the UFC. Contender Series, I feel like, is a waste at this time. I mean, he's already fought on, I mean, these 3 fights are Contender Series right here. This fight and then the last 2, those are at least worth 1 Contender Series win, and both of them super impressive. So sign him to the UFC if he gets the victory. Kind of wrapping up the weekend events here, but I wanted to give an update as well on the UFC China situation. So a while ago, I'd mentioned, and you've heard over and over, different fighters, people in the media saying that they've heard the UFC is going to China in August, some at the beginning of September, and kind of looking like Road to UFC would be in conjunction with that. And what I had heard is that the UFC event, well, I'll say this first. The bad news is that the UFC is no longer planning to go to China in August. That event has been canceled. It's been moved. That event as a whole has been moved to a US city the same date. I'm guessing it's probably not going to be like an all Asian fight card. It's not going to be all the same fighters. You may get a couple of them in there, but because it's going to be in front of a live US audience, it's not going to be at the Apex. So I don't know why they would like stack the card with a bunch of Chinese fighters against a bunch of US fighters. And I do know the city that it's going to in the US. I've heard that Tampa, Florida is a possibility for that card. That would be August 31st. But don't repeat me. Don't quote me. Don't say like that I'm saying that the UFC is going to Tampa on August 31st. That's a rumor that I've heard. I think it's likely, but I'm not super close to that. That's just what someone told me. But the original plan was for the UFC to go not to Shanghai or Beijing or Shenzhen like they've been in the past, but to a new city called Hangzhou. That was the plan. They're going to go to Hangzhou. And for some of you, you may have heard this as well already, but they were going to go to Hangzhou. What happened last time with UFC Shanghai is that they weren't able to get a permit. So basically, if you don't live in China, you probably don't know. You've probably never heard of Hangzhou, China. So let me just show you real quick. So Shanghai is just one of several like mega cities in all in the same area. Kind of like if you go to South China, go around Hong Kong, you've got like Guangzhou, Shenzhen. So I'm going to show you kind of what the setup is here. Does anyone else just spend like hours and hours looking at maps for no reason? Because I do. So Shanghai, this is all like a fairly small area. And I'm somewhat familiar with it because I spent a summer basically city hopping between a lot of these cities. Flew into Shanghai, and then you take like a 30-minute train and you get to this city, Suzhou, which is, gosh, probably like 11, 12 million people. I had some friends spend some time here in Wuxi. I spent a couple weeks in this city, Changzhou, which is also several million people. Spent time in Nanjing, which used to be a capital of China in the 1930s, during World War II, or at least most of it. And that's a massive city of like 12 million people too. And then, so Shanghai, kind of its own province. So what the UFC did is they went to one of the closest cities that they could that was in a different province. So maybe thinking the rules are a little bit different here. Maybe we can get a permit here. So they could have gone to Suzhou. I don't know what the arena situation's like, but Suzhou is a very kind of new, modern city with a lot of new development. Hangzhou is as well. The thing about Hangzhou is that in 2018, I want to say, they had the Asian Games there. So they had a lot of new sports arenas built there, a whole big sports park. And there is an 18,000 seat basketball arena in Hangzhou that's fairly new. And I never heard exactly what the venue was supposed to be for Hangzhou, but I'm guessing that would have been it. So for Shanghai, you can take an hour and a half train over to Hangzhou, and all your UFC staff can get there pretty quickly, as well as all the fighters that are based out of Shanghai. So Hangzhou would have been a great option to go if they could have made it happen. It's a very economically prosperous city, has a reputation being a very beautiful, well put together city. So I'm sad that it's not going to happen. I'm guessing they just maybe didn't get the permit again, is what I heard. So I don't know what's going to happen going forward, if it's just going to be more of the same in China. I don't know why they are not able to get it now when they were able to get it before the pandemic. But yeah, that's a big shame. So, yeah, that's the update there. I don't know what the future is as far as for Road to UFC. I've not heard a single thing. Well, I take that back. Early on, like a couple months ago, I had heard that all of the rounds of Road to UFC were going to be at the Shanghai PI, but then with UFC Hangzhou, maybe they were going to have it there instead. Would make sense to me, right? But I'm guessing now that there's going to be no UFC event in China this summer, that they will probably just have the Road to UFC semis at the Shanghai PI as well. I would bet on that. So there's the update. Sorry to disappoint. But yeah, there's your update. And let's get into some of your questions. All right. Been reading a lot of Kareem Zidane lately. His thoughts to call out the inhumane and hypocritical things in MMA are very interesting. Why do you think people get mad at him when he's simply calling out the politics and how it intersects with MMA? Seen his Twitter feed and lots of death threats, lots of accusing him of anti-right-wing stuff, calling him names that I cannot repeat here. I mean, he is anti-white, that was not a Freudian slip. Anti-right-wing. I mixed up the letters there. Realized what I might have did. No, I mean, he's obviously on the left. But I mean, people don't like him just because they don't like his politics. That's what it is. MMA is a highly politicized sport. Politics in sport are deeply enmeshed, as we saw as early as the UFC broadcast last weekend from Newark, New Jersey. Politics in sport are essentially one, and people don't like Kareem Zidane's politics. So that's why they don't like Kareem Zidane. Everything that the UFC fan base is, Kareem Zidane is the opposite. So that's why they don't like him. And, it was so interesting because I think I'm starting to realize that more and more as you all ask me the questions is, you're asking why does the UFC choose this sponsor? Why do they do this? Why do they do that? Because when you're in marketing, which I was a mass communications major in digital media for a grand total of 1 semester. So don't look at me as the expert, but I do know from working through social media questions, marketing, that kind of thing, is that what you're trying to do is you're trying to find out what is my ideal, what is like the ultimate fan of my product or service. How old are they? What's their gender? What are their political views? What things do they like? And so basically, like, the UFC is building their platform around that. That's basically the answer to all of the questions of why are they aligning with this sponsor? Why are they parading this politician into the middle of their arenas and putting them on the broadcast 17 times throughout the night on ESPN? That's the answer to all that. It's just the UFC, bunting the ball to their fan base. And Kareem Zidane is basically like everything that archetype is, like the UFC fan archetype. It's just like, go to the opposite dimension, and that's Kareem Zidane. So there you go. I'm a fan of Kareem, by the way. Rutola MMA debut is pretty big in Chinese MMA media right now. Didn't know that. For the simple fact that he and his brothers are former students of Josh Hinger, so they want to see how Josh's style translates to MMA. I've seen Rotola's game. It's really different from Josh's. Josh's game is more evident and Whaley than that of the twins. Do you think the affiliation or coaching someone can bring interest? Limited interest. I think probably the fan base you're talking about is a pretty hardcore niche fan base. MMA in China is still pretty niche. And so it's a niche within a niche, maybe even within a niche, because like MMA, Whaley, and then like really hardcore Whaley fans that know about like who her coaches are. But yeah, I mean, that's a great thing, but it's like, can he get the fight to the mat? Can he strike well enough? Is he going to, be like a Damian Maia or a what's the that Gracie that has been suffering in the UFC, Kron Gracie? Is he going to try to play that game where it's like, I'm just going to stick to my jiu-jitsu and basically avoid everything else until I can get the fight to the mat? We'll have to see about that. But yeah, I don't know if I could break it down enough to really be able to tell you like about the overlay. And I also haven't really watched a lot of one's grappling fights either. So, but I'm excited now that he's entering into MMA. I'm kind of wanting to learn a little bit more about him and his style for sure. Am I familiar with the term transitionary game in MMA? Transitionary fighters. Someone who can attack the gray areas in scrambles off the mat or escapes from the clinch. Who do you know from Road to UFC that has a game based on attacking in transition? Note that they said this is a hard skill to learn. Only a few in MMA actually use this idea. I thought that Masuto Kawana did a pretty good job of that. He's like a good wrestler, but he was also like pretty offensive in the spaces in between wrestling attacks. So I felt like he's a pretty good fighter that he's going to be training in Vietnam. I was actually just talking to his manager on the phone earlier today, and he's going to be training in Vietnam. But yeah, I think Masuto Kawana, ideally, like, I think to probably have a good transitionary game, you need to have wrestling. Like, there needs to be a need for transition, the ability to transition. So you need to have like both some like at least like fundamentals of like clinch work, and then also fundamentals of wrestling. So I think Kawana is a good guy for that. I've seen Dong Huashang do that from time to time as well. But I think that she has a lot of things to work on. So that she just came to mind. But Kawana, watch for him. He's a guy that I wouldn't be super surprised if he even made it to the finals. I know he's fighting Shiabin in his next fight, but like, I think that's a winnable fight for him, honestly. He was not a guy that had a lot of following before Road to UFC, but he's a really good wrestler. And obviously, like, I'm tight with his manager, and so his manager was like, has been hyping him up to me a lot. But I think he was really impressive in his Road to UFC fight. So that's what I'd say. Do you find that old fans of MMA look to respect the history of MMA as a whole versus the newer fans who don't even try to learn the history of MMA is making threads of champions runs post-pandemic? Oh, i.e. making threads of championship runs post-pandemic. Yeah, there's like, it's not just old versus new, but it's like there's multiple generations of MMA fans. And, you know, your question is if new fans don't necessarily respect the history of MMA. You know, when I was getting into MMA, when I was like, this may help shed some light on it. So first of all, when I got into MMA in 2007, there had been a little over a decade of history. Pride had just ended its like big run, and it was still like a big deal. Like people still do today, but fewer so. But it was like all the guys that were really big in Pride were still a really big deal. And if you wanted to, like, if I wanted to catch up on past MMA history and fights, which I did, I actually had a like when I was first getting into the sport, I literally would go to the store and buy, if there was a UFC or Pride DVD at the used movie store that I didn't have, most likely I would buy it. And also, this is a dirty little secret. This is where pretty much most of my high school graduation money went. So, whoops. But I would ride my bike down to the Hastings in my college town, and I would buy UFC and Pride DVDs, and then I would stay up until 2 a.m. watching them. But compare that to now, where it's, and at that time we didn't have UFC Fight Pass, so we actually didn't have this huge library available to us as easily. But a lot of us had MMA fights on a lot more physical media. So I almost feel like in that situation, at least for me, like me learning MMA history was watching DVDs, and for people before me, it was watching VHS tapes. Original UFC VHS tapes. And a lot of people got into MMA because they went to their friend's house. Their friend had a UFC, tape, and they were able to watch it. Now it's like you've got ESPN. I actually don't know how much UFC airs on like old fights on the ESPN proper channel, or if they're all just putting a lot of those on ESPN Plus. But it's kind of like, if you wanted to, you could go onto ESPN Plus, or if you're in the US, or onto UFC Fight Pass and binge things, kind of just like mix and match. But I think a lot of people from my original generation of MMA fandom, we had a lot of physical media, and I feel like that almost lends itself to like a little bit more of a dedicated viewing. When I would buy these DVDs, it was like they had my whole attention. I just dropped $10 on this DVD. And so I felt like I wanted to actually watch the whole DVD. It was an experience in and of itself. And you can really expand this to a lot of like the broader transition between physical media, DVDs, VHS tapes, Blu-ray, and streaming now, where viewing habits have changed a lot. And I wonder if like, that could just be one of many things that could make a difference. And maybe a lot of you, that's not your situation, and you never, have the physical media to fall back on. But at least for me, that's how I learned a lot of UFC history and really had that sort of mental connection, that heart connection to MMA history, was that I had this big movie collection, and I would go through them. Sometimes I would even rewatch events from top to bottom. And even if it was a bad fight, like at the very worst, I would just fast forward it, but I would still watch it, and see who the winner was. But I don't feel like people really do that now. It's kind of just like hop around, find a fighter I like, watch their fights. But because of that, I don't know. This is probably something I'd love to just like chat with other fans about. Just like, how do you get plugged into UFC MMA history, especially like, I mean, man, if you're talking about like Bellator or PFL, like PFL is on ESPN Plus, so I guess you could go back, watch their events. But like Bellator, I feel like so much of those fights are just lost. Like people have no respect for what Eddie Alvarez or Michael Chandler or Ben Askren did in Bellator in the early days, because you can't. Maybe they're on YouTube, I don't know, but like it's just not intuitive to be able to find that chapter of history. So I think that is one reason. I think also like I think there's probably more fans that are gravitated towards one or a couple fighters and maybe not huge fans of MMA as a whole. And so maybe they tune in for those fighters' fights, or fighters that are adjacent to those fighters, Habib, Islam, the other Dagestani fighters, kind of the fighters that are in certain groupings together. Maybe they follow those. And so that could be a difference as well. It's definitely, it's a shame, but it's almost inevitable that's going to happen. As your sport exists for longer, you have a longer history. There's so much more. I mean, if you're hopping into MMA now, there is 30 years of history to catch up on. When I hopped in, there was half as much of that. And so it is a lot. And not only the years, but the frequency of events. There was like probably just like 5 UFC events a year when it started. And now there's 39 or so. So it's like that back half, those second 15 years of UFC history is like, it's so much to catch up on. And this is almost like the oversaturation argument plays into this too, of like, how is anyone supposed to just like, not only keep up, it's hard enough to keep up with what's going on today, and much less the last decade of MMA history. So I cut a little bit of slack to newer MMA fans just because I'm like, yeah, there's a lot to catch up on. I don't know what the best way to educate yourself on that history, or like the most efficient way to do that. Probably just like, follow championship lineages and then go through those on UFC Fight Pass. I think that may be one of the best ways. You could if you really are locked in to MMA for the long haul, start. And I've done this before, even in recent years, just like start with UFC 1 and then keep going, and then just, go through the library until you get bored. Some of those early UFC events are just so entertaining. And you really see like a lot of these guys that are, bent over old guys now that don't get the respect they deserve. You really see how guys like Don Fry and Randy Couture and Pat Miletich, a lot of these, why they were so respected back in the day, and why hardcore fans have so much reverence for them. When you actually see them fight, their journeys, what they were up against, and what the landscape of MMA was like, you start to see, okay, this makes a little bit more sense now. No Clever Pun. Is Demetrius Johnson's coach Matt Hume considered a conflict of interest if he's coaching DJ, but during fights he's talking to the judges? That's been a big criticism. That has definitely been a big criticism, that Matt Hume is involved way too much with one. It might be different if they didn't have fighters in the organization. And to be fair, it's like Demetrius, I think hopefully, they're looking at conflicts of interest for his specific fights, but otherwise I don't know if it's a huge deal with judging. what they're supposed to do, what every commission is supposed to do, is if they're choosing judges and a referee for a contest, they're supposed to look at the referee and be like, does he have any prior connections to this fighter? And then that weighs into their decision. So if they're doing their due diligence, they're looking at that, then perhaps there's not a huge issue with it. I mean, Demetrius Johnson is not all that active. He's like semi-retired. I feel like we'll probably get at least one more out of him, but it's not like he's really fighting that much. So I don't know if it's that big of a deal right now, but that has definitely been a big criticism in the past. Do I know about Japanese kickboxer named Masaki Nori? Analysts and studies on him you've seen, and some say he's the most exciting kickboxer out there. Does it disappoint you that he's signed with one? I mean, if he's getting paid and he has a good deal, sure. I mean, I still discourage every single, at least on the MMA side, and I think it's similar on the kickboxing Muay Thai side, at least for a lot of people, but I discourage every single athlete from signing with one championship. At first, I was a little bit like, not the best, but like, if you're happy there, that's fine. But at this point, I've just seen way too many fighters' careers wrecked by one champ. I mean, just career after career after career, most of which have never seen the light of day. But you saw that tweet from Ali Abdel Aziz the other day saying like some of these promoters are wrecking fighters' careers. I guarantee you he was talking about one championship. I would 99% sure because he's polled. He's tried to get a lot of his dominance MMA fighters out of one championship. And I've heard from a gazillion fighters, managers, coaches, stuff like that they've had it with one, that they're never going to do business with them again because they've wrecked so many fighters' careers. So I don't know what kind of deal he has. I mean, hopefully he's at least happy with whatever it is. I don't know. I mean, it's like, one's relationship with Japan has been pretty tense so far, and they've talked on one hand about like really wanting to have events in Japan, really serve the Japanese market, but at the same time there's been a lot of ways they've disrespected that market, under-delivered in a couple different ways. And so I don't know. I mean, yeah, a little bit disappointed. I've also heard that he's the real deal, but yeah, it would be, I think it'd be different for me if one was holding an event in Japan once a quarter and was able to just like regularly put a lot of these same fighters on these events. I think that would be a little bit different for me. I mean, shoot, here's a crazy idea for you, one championship. And I know this will probably not be that appealing to the guys over at Lumpini Stadium, the Thai Royal Army. But how about this? Rather than doing every single show in Lumpini Stadium every week, why not have like one Friday fight show a month? Do that in Tokyo. It doesn't have to be Saitama Arena. It could be a smaller arena. Doesn't even have to be like Ariake Arena, but smaller arena, and then just make these almost like tentpole events with your Japanese fighters. I think that would be really great. Once a month. Maybe that's not regular enough, and it kind of breaks the whole like every Friday thing in Bangkok, but I think that'd be a great idea. And it would also, I think, serve both your broadcast partners in Japan, the fighters and fans, a lot better if you could do that. As you probably know, I've been spending the last few months arguing with people on the internet about Zhang versus Yang. I am aware of that. And the general excuse they have is that if Yan was a better MMA fighter, she would win a rematch. Well, that would be true in 100% of every single fight. Yes. Every time Weili wins, these same people make excuses that her opponent either didn't care or prepare well, that she'll lose a rematch. Have you seen this type of excuse? Well, no, because I'm not really on like forums, and I don't spend a lot of time in like Twitter or YouTube comments, but unless they're on my videos. But I mean, can't you say that literally about every single fight? If the losing fighter was better, that they would have won. I mean, is that not obvious to everybody? Yeah. I mean, people have allegiances to fighters. People support the fighters they like, and they will die on that hill whenever they can. So, not surprising to me, but that's pretty paper thin. This week, a lot of combat sports outside the UFC. There is a lot that's really good. Unfortunately, the UFC will still do better than the rest of them. Why do you think the UFC can still sell bad quality, but still get viewership? The brand, because there's a lot of things, even outside of the fights, that the UFC a gajillion times does better than everybody else. And so they built that brand. I think this weekend's event, let me just look at that event real quick. I don't particularly think that the main event will be all that exciting. Unfortunately, I think it'll be on the boring UFC Apex middleweight main event level, but got Dominic Reyes versus Dustin Jacoby, Raul Rosas versus Ricky Tercios, Bruno Hulk Fajeda against Dustin Stoltzfus. That's going to be a violent knockout. Julian Marquez, old training partner of mine, against Zach Reese. I love watching Marquez fight. Miguel Baeza against Puna Soriano. That should be an exciting fight. Carlos Prates against Charles Radke. Yikes. Who else you got? Andrea Lee's on the card. Daniel Marcos versus John Castaneda. Let's see. Puja Tomar, as we talked about. Thiago Moises even versus Ludovic Klein. There's a lot of fights on there I think could be pretty exciting. What the UFC has at their advantage is that they have the freedom to selectively cultivate their roster around the most exciting fighters. Everyone else gets some of that trickle down, and they get a lot of the cast offs that the UFC doesn't want. And I've said this time and time again, is that the UFC is not out there trying to merely get the best fighters in the world. They're trying to get the best exciting fighters in the world, entertaining fighters that are even at the top of the game, but produce a lot of decisions. They're not interested in that if they're not exciting, if the fighters don't have a big following. Maybe after enough pressure, they may finally, sign some of those fighters. But, PFL, Bellator, I think one is in a little bit situation because they have a lot more different types of toys that they can play with. But I think overall, and don't hear me say that I don't think the UFC puts on bad cards. I think they definitely do. And that usually for me is in retrospect. What the UFC is trying to do, and going to Louisville, Kentucky, there's hardly any local fighters, if any, on the card. They are trying to create an entertaining, memorable night for casual fans. They are not loading this card up with star power. It's not like they're going to New York and they're trying to sell the most they can for tickets. They are trying to create an exciting, memorable night for fans that are casual, that casually watch UFC on TV and are going to the event mainly because of the brand. So because of that, I think they've put a lot of exciting fights on the card. I think it'll honestly be a more entertaining experience even than last Saturday's pay-per-view in Newark. And I would have told you that beforehand. Looking at that card last week, I was like, I don't know if this is actually going to be all that great. Got Jailton Almeida versus Alexander Romanov, Strickland versus Costa. I don't know if it's going to be as exciting as people might think. But yeah, as long as you're entertaining people, everything else will take care of itself. Really, I mean, right? Is that not how it works? As long as you're entertaining people, viewership is going to keep growing. So, and that's why I think things are a little bit different with One Championship, because I think that overall they have created a very entertaining product. And there's a couple things about the production and how everything functions that I would change. Okay, a lot of things I would change, but overall, for the most part, it's a pretty entertaining product. And so it doesn't surprise. I mean, for them claiming to get a lot of viewers, like, breaking all these viewership record numbers, they're definitely hyperbole. But I also think that I'm also not surprised if they get a lot of viewers, just because their product, I think, is pretty entertaining. But they've got their own issues. Do I know of the fight dietitian works with diets for Adesanya, Volkanovski, Edwards? Said once hydration testing is actually worse for the athletes. Do you agree with that? Fight dietitian, I've seen a couple accounts that are similar to that. That is Jordan Sullivan. Oh, okay. I watched a video. Luke Thomas posted a video today from him criticizing Valentina's no water thing, which was so stupid. What she said about not drinking water, and people defending it was stupid. I think people defending it was stupider than her even saying it, to be honest. But yeah, he's got a big following, 120K. Yeah, definitely. I mean, we've known that fighters can pretty easily cheat the one championship hydration system and still cut weight and pass the hydration tests. But I'll have to look up his specific critique of the hydration system and how it could actually be worse for athletes. I haven't heard that, but I'm interested to read about that. So Sound and Pound, they have a segment from movies. Turns out Drake has not seen any iconic movies. Alex has seen it all. Which would describe you? Oh man, great question. I mean, the movies that there's movies that are iconic to me. I would say overall, I've not seen a majority of really iconic movies. Usually when there's an Oscar winner, I haven't seen that, or a lot of its contemporaries. A lot of just classic movies, I honestly haven't seen either. Sometimes I get around to them. I my lane is sci-fi, and I haven't even seen all of the big sci-fi movies, but a lot of big classic sci-fi movies, I have seen those. So with some pretty glaring exceptions, I still need to get around to the Terminator, all those movies, or at least the early ones. So many of these movies have modern sequels, but it's just really go and watch the originals. But I'm the biggest Star Wars fan that you'll find of the original trilogy. Love the Alien movies. Love Blade Runner, that kind of stuff. So within the sci-fi genre, yeah, I'm all in. In fact, this isn't a movie, but I'm reading through the original Thrawn trilogy, which is, in my heart, I want to call it the original Star Wars sequel trilogy. It came out in the early 90s. It was literally the first bit of Star Wars canon that came out after the original trilogy. So it is a trilogy set 5 years after Return of the Jedi, and functionally it feels like it should be the sequel trilogy. I wish that it was, but I'm about to start book 2. Just finished the first one and enjoyed it a lot. So I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I really get into that fantasy genre for the most part. I'm really into as well, but I don't know. It's hit or miss for me, I would say. Someone who hasn't seen iconic movies like Star Wars or this is a continuation. Star Wars or Indiana Jones, like Alex, who has seen. Okay, yeah, I've obviously Star Wars. I'm a huge Indiana Jones, at least of the original trilogy, or at least of parts 1 and 3. Parts second one, Temple of Doom. There can be, I can be really appreciative of the artistry of Temple of Doom. while it's like overall as a movie, I don't think it's that great. But yeah, adventure movies like that I really like too. More of like classic drama movies, I'm not always as connected to those for sure. So intermission from your earlier rant. Something funny happened this week. Conor pulls out of his press conference, and a lot of satire news was made to meme them. I tagged Sportskeeda on one on the satire, and they ran with the story that Conor was knocked out by Zab Judah. Who's at fault there? Satire news guy or the person reporting it from Sportskeeda? Sportskeeda is. They deleted the story after a day, but I screenshotted it. Yeah. You know, what was so funny to me is, and I don't know how this gets fixed or where this stops, but like, I mentioned it maybe a week or two ago about how there's a lot of like, it's happening now with Contender Series. There's a lot of like really flimsy news out there where like one person will say that such and such fighter is fighting this guy on the Contender Series, and then everyone runs with it. And then you're like, I don't even know where that rumor came from. And then the fight ends up not being true at all. Or like what I'll do is I'll like trace, because, I'll put fights on my calendar, and that includes Contender Series, but I'm not going to put a fight on that calendar unless I feel really confident in it. And so I've been like tracing some of these like Contender Series rumors. Just like, where did that start? Who's the first person? You'll trace it back, and it'll be some account that has like 150 followers, not a media account, just like, I don't know, just like, I've never heard of this guy before, and he's never ever put anything newsworthy out for any fight. So I don't know. He could be right, but so much of, and then like these rumors will just spread up to the point where people are like, no, this guy's fighting this guy in the Contender Series. And that's just one example. But then just like with the Conor McGregor thing, and granted, people have a lot of things at stake. People bet on fights. People travel across the world to see this fight. They drop thousands of dollars. I understand why the stakes are higher, especially with like the sport's biggest star. So in some ways I understand, but yeah, there's so much panic around Conor McGregor pulling out of a press conference. Ariel Helwani said it well of like, if they didn't have a press conference, then like none of this would be in our discourse surrounding this fight. Like we don't even know, like, and then someone, it was like Cece Legaspi said that he wondered, like his quote was like, I wonder if Conor McGregor has an injury and maybe that's why he's pulling out. And then someone quoted that saying Cece Legaspi believes that Conor McGregor has an injury, or like it was just the whole telephone thing. And so, yeah, so many rumors, and just like the whole telephone thing. Like I feel like whenever things come out there, before I repost it now, and I do this because I have, made a mistake or two. And there's been a few times where even people that I trust the most have let me down and not done their due diligence to like fully confirm a report from the necessary parties before putting it out. In that case, what can you do? Who do you know to trust? When you can't trust Dana White, that every single fight that he announces has been fully signed by both parties or even verbally agreed, who can you trust? But yeah, there's so much panic going around with the whole Conor McGregor thing. So many rumors, and you really like, I mean, you could be an evil troll and pull the levers and just like spread every rumor that you wanted to out there, and it would get legs and eventually people would believe it. So I don't know how that changes or how we fix that, just because like social media is just an uncontrollable beast, and there's no way to moderate that. And so like, I don't know, do we just as media members need to make like training videos on how to distinguish fact from fiction? I feel like that would kind of feel like talking down to the fan base a little bit. maybe that would help, but I don't know. People just don't have like the media literacy to know how to like adequately assess if something's true or not. So yeah, that is kind of funny that you tagged Puja Tomar. Why was Puja? Oh, sorry, I was looking ahead there. Why was Puja Tomar signed to the UFC and not through Contender Series or Road to UFC? To me, she doesn't seem that different from the other Indian girls that fought on Road to UFC. She has fought better competition. I do think that she is a lot better. She has a lot more tools and much better training than I would say Kiran Singh, even Priya Sharma. I think that she's a lot more versatile than Priya Sharma, has had a lot more high level competition. She's pretty like Puja has pretty much fought in one championship or Matrix Fight Night in all of her fights, and she's fought in high quality relative to what the like international women's strawweight division, like those standards. She fought high quality competition pretty much her whole career, where those other two fighters have not. So I think that she's a big step up from there. I think that she was also signed because almost with like every division, it's a little bit different. Like if you're a male lightweight, and say you're an Indian fighter that's 8-4, you're not going to get signed to the men's lightweight division. If you're an 8-4 Indian heavyweight that has fought for one championship and Matrix Fight Night, then maybe you do. Also, Puja Tomar was signed I think it was last September or October. And you know that like the discussions were probably going on long before that, working things out with Matrix Fight Night. So at that point, like they didn't have Road to UFC. If the discussions would have taken place 6 months later, then yeah, maybe she would have gone through Road to UFC. But I maintain that she is the best Indian woman right now in MMA. She still could wash out in the UFC, strike out, all of that. She could, but I am not as upset about it as I would be if it was any of like the much more like deep men's divisions. Really, there's a lot of UFC strawweights that I think that Puja Tomar could beat. There really are. And strawweight it's an aging division. If you're the UFC trying to make headway in India, which they really are, like they're pushing hard to India right now. They really are. And that doesn't mean that you sign like 8 fighters right to the organization. I think Road to UFC would tell you that's not a great idea. But I think, yeah, signing 1 or 2. I mean, and Anshul Jubli went through Road to UFC. So really just signing 1 fighter, it's not, if you got 700 fighters on your roster, it's not going to be a big deal. It's low risk, very high reward. Think of it that way. Like if Puja Tomar washes out, like, okay, like we move on. Indian MMA continues to grow. 1 fighter out of our roster of 700. If anything, even her fighting on Saturday, that is almost enough. Like that has already like probably done things for Indian MMA to help it grow. I mean, Puja Tomar, I don't know if y'all realize how popular these athletes are. She has 431,000 followers on Instagram. How many UFC strawweights making their UFC debut have that much? I know it's not a popularity contest. I know that, but like, just be honest. When the UFC sees a fighter with that kind of popularity and they're like a halfway decent fighter, they're from a country that they're really wanting to grow their presence in. Like, I think they're going to be willing to take that chance. So I don't know. I'm not that upset. People get really upset about this. I'm like, I don't really care. It's a prelim on UFC Louisville. And if she washes out, she washes out. Barton Sparkle Crisp. That's a new name. Happy to have you here. New MMA and found many great analysis pages. They all have their own unique style of analyzing fights. To me, it seems like a magic trick being revealed when they explain small details. Seems their work is not as popular as someone that creates rage bait or humor news. Why is that? Well, when you go to the grocery store, what kind of magazines do you see by the checkout counter? The checkout counter is the one spot that everybody in the grocery store has to go through. So ask that question. Why are the tabloids right by the checkout counter? Because they appeal to the most possible people. And having highly emotional, attention-getting headlines, that's always sold, and it's always going to continue to sell. So that's why. It's because they're the tabloid, the grocery store tabloid of YouTube, is the best way I can put that. And we always say, if you don't like it, don't watch it, or even more, block it. But at the same time, you may hate this restaurant down the street because it's always crowded and you can never get a spot, and say it's the worst. But it's the same as saying, like, yeah, no one likes that restaurant, it's always too crowded. Well, someone goes there, someone watches these. That's why. It's because analysis takes time. It's a patient work. And some of these pages are really popular. There are some analysts that do really good work. The ones that do it the best, they are making good money for themselves. Not everyone is. And part of that is just figuring out presentation, having the tech to do it, the right personality, all of that. I do some of that sometimes, but I'm a long ways away from like having my telestrator and being able to just like so perfectly and articulate everything. My technical knowledge is not super deep. So there's a lot of pages out there that do good work. It's just people, it's story. What a lot of these rage bait videos, articles give you is they give you story, and story is attractive and appealing. And that is, I would say, the advantage, or like the skill of them, if there is one, is that they are tapping into story. The story may not be factually correct, and it may actually be harmful to multiple parties, but it's still story, and we like good stories. So that's why they sell. Said this before, but the UFC does not care about the Asian market, but they pretend to, even with a great Chinese champion. It's one or the other. Either stop caring about it or go all in. Why are they teetering in the middle? Yeah, I feel like I've covered this before in the past. I don't think that they're doing everything that they could be doing to build the Asian market, but I think they are doing a lot of things that they don't get credit for. And I also think that like with China, for example, there's a lot going on behind the scenes that people may not know about, or with like, even like, they tried to have an event in Korea. They've multiple times tried to have an event in China. I feel like we could I'm actually starting to feel like we could get a UFC event in Japan in the near future. It feels like that is, I don't know what the numbers are, but it feels like that market's starting to gain some steam. And I read a recent interview from Kevin Chang talking about rebuilding the Japanese market. So maybe that's finally happening. It feels like they are making a push towards Thailand, and it feels like they're making a strong push towards India. So I think that they are, and I think that there are some roadblocks that have kept them. I think if not for these roadblocks in China, they would be having like 4 events a year in China. I mean, they built a freaking PI, for crying out loud. The goal of the PI was so that they could have like 30, 40 really good Chinese athletes on the UFC roster, so that they could have multiple events a year in China, have a big broadcast deal, all of that. It's just been a huge roadblock not being able to do that. But they've had fan events in multiple cities. And if you live in China and you're watching this, you would probably know better than me, but I think that's a big thing. I don't know why they haven't had, I mean, they've had an event in Singapore, 2 events. Yeah, just wait. A few things they could be doing better, but I think that they are doing a lot at the same time. Glad you came back. Hey, thanks. Me too. Found out about the news about UFC not being able to go to China. Will they ever make it to Singapore this year? I know a lot of hardcores from China will go, like UFC 275. When Weili was there and she wasn't even in the main event, Comey. Yeah, I think Singapore would probably be their fallback. I think that they definitely want to deliver something for the Asian fans as soon as possible if China doesn't work out. So August is probably too soon. They've already got events for the first 3 weeks of August. I don't know if there's going to be an event on August 24th yet, but August 31st, I'm guessing you'll see in Tampa. September, the weekend after that, we don't know, but we do know 2 weekends in September are booked for the Sphere and for Paris. So yeah, they could try to squeeze in something in Singapore in September or October, something like that, if they can't make anything else work out. Hey, it's been a while. Just want to hear your thought on Vietnam MMA scene. It seems like that country is going to develop more new fighters from their country. Looks like MMA is going to be huge in Vietnam. Potentially, we may see a few of their fighters fight internationally. Yeah, I think Vietnam's at a good place. I manage the Tapology results for Vietnam as well. And so everything that goes on in Vietnam, to my knowledge, goes through me. So I do have a little bit of knowledge on that. I think that they are in a good place. A couple of years ago, there was nothing going on in Vietnam. If there was a fighter from Vietnam fighting somewhere, most likely they trained outside of Vietnam. But there's starting to be some gyms there. They've got a Vietnam top team. And, you know, what you're seeing in Vietnam outside of sports is that Vietnam is really growing as a tourist destination. So think about Thailand. Thailand for much longer has been a key tourist destination. Lots of beaches, tropical climate, great food, fairly cheap to travel and live there. Everything you could want. So because of that, Thailand has grown as like a training hub, and it helps that they also have the Muay Thai Foundation as well. But it's become a training hub for a lot of people internationally because I think it was already a big tourist destination. With Vietnam growing as a tourist destination, I think you could start to see that more and more as well. And sorry, I forgot to plug in my computer. Give me just a second. Hold that thought. Okay, so Vietnam. Yeah. And with some of these shows, so in Vietnam, you've got two things working for you. You've got Lion Championship, which is the main all Vietnamese promotion there. And then you've got AFC, Angels Fighting Championship, a Korean promotion that goes back and forth hosting shows in Korea and Vietnam. They haven't really had a whole lot of top Vietnamese fighters on their shows, but they'll have some every once in a while. It's something. So they've got both of those things. And what I am starting to see, and Vietnam also has a pretty solid casino environment. So they've got that working for them too. There's more and more, I was talking about the tourist destination. I'm hearing about more and more fighters, international fighters, training in Vietnam. I'm actually hearing that. So there's a handful of Brazilian guys, Felipe Nego-Chadle. Who's the other guy? They fight with Lion Championship. One of their champions is a girl named Chelsea Cashwell, who is American. And Lion Championship has a handful of other fighters. They've got a German guy, Mirko Maurice Horn, and all these people train out of Vietnam. And like I mentioned earlier, Masuto Kawana going to do his training camp for Road UFC semis in Vietnam. So those are really good things. Before you can produce international level talent, you've got to have a healthy regional scene. And I think Lion Championship really is providing that. They've got monthly shows. They are, it's really easy for people to watch. It airs on Facebook for free. They have champions in their weight classes. So I think that's great. Gives fighters these 5-minute rounds. They also put on amateur fights too. So I think they are they're really like everything you could want out of a quintessential regional promotion. So that is great. They are really bringing up Vietnamese MMA a lot. Some pretty good strikers there. You know, you'll get guys, since it's close to Thailand, you'll get guys that are good Muay Thai strikers, other types of Southeast Asian striking styles, things like that. And yeah, just with the proximity between like other Asian countries, Thailand, Korea, Japan, China, like I think you'll get to see a lot of these guys going from country to country fighting each other. So I think Vietnam is in a good position for right now. I'm really happy with what I'm seeing for sure. It'll be, there's no one right now that I'm like, yeah, 2 or 3 more fights and this guy's going to be in the UFC. I mean, this is disregarding An Twin Ho and Quang Lei, who are 2 LFA vets that An Twin Ho, we already know is going to be on Contender Series. Quang Lei, I saw Quang Lei's name added to the UFC fighter database. I don't know if that's old news or not, but I mean, the guy's like 7-0 or something. And I feel like he's owed a Contender Series shot. So those 2 guys could really be like big for Vietnamese MMA as well. Few great Vietnamese prospects, but they're all based in the US. And that's honestly great too, right? Like that's what another thing you want. It doesn't have to be the US, but you want to have your best prospects rooted in a really, really strong, healthy training culture somewhere in the world that has a lot of great coaching and opportunities. So eventually, you know, you can do what you want, but like some of those fighters may eventually go back and spread some of that knowledge where they came from as well, back to their home countries of Vietnam. That would be really cool too. Do I know Edward Tavarian? He's one of the best lightweights in the world, but not in the UFC. Ryan Wagner explained this transition game, which is really unique, but the UFC tried to make him fight in Contender Series. And then Ghost made a meme of 3 blind mice and calling them the scouts. He doesn't get a lot of finishes, but his style should be enough where he doesn't need a Contender Series contract. Does this go back to Maynard being clueless about scouting talent? So yeah, I'm not at all familiar with his style, really, like his background at all. I've heard his name mentioned a lot of prospects. You got to realize, like, MMA is a niche. I'm sucked into Asian MMA. Even that, I miss a lot of things. And so, like, the best prospect out of Armenia or wherever he's from, somewhere in Europe, I'm not super plugged. I just don't follow that. But headlines more so than I follow like kickboxing or Muay Thai. But no, I have heard his name mentioned a lot. And the thing about I don't know how much the UFC is interested in him or not. The UFC has been getting a lot of flack lately for not going hard after the best prospects. And, I don't know what Tarvarian. Yeah. I don't know what his style's like, if it's what the UFC is looking for. But yeah, it's like, the UFC saves a lot of money by basically, like, rather than even if you signed without Contender Series, say you sign a prospect for a 15 and 15 contract. This just guarantees that you can sign the majority of your talent on 10 and 10 contracts. Save a lot of money that way. And Tavarian is basically like, well, no, I don't. I mean, forget the Contender Series label. You're just trying to sign me to a 10 and 10 contract. And I have this extra hoop to go through to even get to that. I appreciate that. The UFC has been getting a lot of flack for not acting on the best prospects, like Paul Hughes is a big one as well. And I think it's probably a slip up by them not signing him, considering they do sign other. The UFC still does sign fighters outside of Contender Series. They do. A lot of times that's for like a short notice opportunity, and a lot of times those will be like American fighters that they know, like, hey, we've got an opportunity in a month. Do you want to hop into this? It's a US based fight. The logistics are easy. So I wish that they would just like have a situation where they're desperate enough to get someone to fill in. And so they sign Tarvarian on short notice to a bigger contract. That would be the best case scenario. The UFC has been getting a lot of flack for not signing prospects, but guys, I do know of one prospect, top prospect, that has signed with the UFC. It'll be one of the biggest prospects, one of the biggest fighters to sign with the UFC in a long time. So I wonder if some of the, and y'all will probably hear about it pretty soon. So I wonder how some of that conversation will shift. They still do go after big fighters and give them big contracts, but yeah, stay tuned. So I just saw on my Twitter feed, do you think the Diaz bros going to events and just picking fights? Is there a way to stay relevant? That's the brand, right? That's the brand. What did Nate Diaz tweeted something recently about it? It said, respect the art was what he said. That's all you need to know. It's a brand. That's what people come for. That's what people love with the Diaz brothers. It's in a way, it's almost like what they're paying for. $80 for that pay-per-view. We gotta get more people to buy that pay-per-view and shell out the $80. It's predictable, but like, I mean, you're gonna profit off of it. Personally, I don't care. Like, there are so many fighters that shove another fighter at a weigh-in or a press conference every single week, and it has literally no bearing on the fight whatsoever. And so I couldn't care less. But again, it's story. People like the story. As an MMA account, which platform is the hardest to grow a following from? Twitter, Instagram, or YouTube? Oh, that is a good question. It's going to be different for every person. I feel like Instagram is hard. So here's the deal. I know how I could grow a lot faster on Instagram. I'm not doing most of those things because, one, I don't have the time. Two, Instagram isn't paying me to do that. There's very little future of getting paid through Instagram for a guy like me, even if I get a bigger following. And three, that's just not always the kind of content that I want to produce. So my Instagram account has been pretty much like a straight line for like a year and a half at least. And I don't really care a whole lot. Like, I mean, I'd love for it to grow, but Instagram has shown me that they are not committed to helping creators earn money. The other thing that is, I would say Twitter and YouTube. I would say YouTube is the easiest. Twitter is, or X. Twitter is sometimes easy, but it's actually probably been the slowest for me, I would say. Instagram, the frustrating thing about Instagram is just how much it changes. This is one of the things I think that leads to burnout on social media, especially Instagram, and high turnover is just how much it freaking changes. It's like every single month there's new features, they're trying different things, and then once a year they're adding a whole nother different type of content. Or it's like, well, do you do posts? Do you do reels? Do you major on stories? Well, you should have a subscription channel so that you could have monthly subscriptions. You should have a broadcast channel. You can have a store on there. There's so many things that are always changing, and it's so frustrating. And the algorithms are always changing. How we use hashtag, like we used to like write our captions one way. We used to do 30 hashtags, and then they're like, no, just use 5. And everything just used to change so much. And it's like, oh, we're deprioritizing this kind of content. We're deprioritizing news content. Where it's like YouTube, I mean, they've added YouTube shorts, but for the most part, YouTube has been mostly the same. Twitter has changed a lot since Elon bought it, but for the most part, like growing on it is still the same. So I'm not saying I've given up on Instagram, but like Instagram is definitely not a priority for me anymore. Twitter is still the best place to like rapidly share news. YouTube is the best place to make money. And I would say YouTube may be the best place to like show your personality too. So that's why I'm sticking with YouTube. I've gotten paid. I don't know. The best future if you ever want to get paid through social media for sure. Another example of conflict of interest. Chaudhry owns Evolve MMA fighters, fight in one, and get special treatment. Is that company just rife with scandals? Yep. You're right. It is. And they don't want you to talk about that either. But yeah, that's exactly the criticism. And that comes from the fighters too. I've heard that from fighters. All right. Second part of earlier question. Only time I've ever seen it was after Volkanovski Holloway, where everyone wanted Volk to lose for some reason. How do you see the rematch for Zhang versus Yan going? Honestly, the same. Probably the same. Maybe more of a dominant win for Zhang. I don't think that there would be a rematch. I don't think that they'll ever rematch personally. So I don't think it's going to happen. And I think that the rematch would probably go the same way. Maybe a little bit more dominant for Zhang. Yeah. Yan, I think, made the best of her opportunity and fought the best fight that she could. But I don't know if she'll get another. I mean, I say that, but then like the state of strawweight right now, Yan could totally put together a win streak against several top strawweights. There's honestly a lot that I think that she could look good against. I mean, and you're not going to like me for saying this, but just let me play this out. Just say it, not a prediction. Just say Suarez beats Zhang. They would probably have a rematch. If Zhang didn't win that one, then maybe like that would open the door for a Zhang versus Yan rematch if Yan had found some success. But otherwise, I don't think it'll probably happen. People seem to forget that Weili is really good at rematches and adjusting to opponent. True. Very true. Why is Dana so obsessed with middleweight main events and middleweights in general? Every time he turns red and announces cards on his Instagram, it's always bad middleweights. I don't know. It seems like perhaps this was not their first choice. Those top 3 divisions, light heavyweight, middleweight, and heavyweight, are like a lot of UFC main events. And maybe just middleweight is a little bit deeper and they can go like farther down the ladder and like and still put on a main event. So I would say middleweight's overall deeper than light heavyweight and heavyweight. Maybe that's why you see some more, but like, you know, it's like both these guys are hit or miss. Like Imavov has had exciting fights. Cannonier has had devastating finishes, but most of his fights have not been very exciting. And I don't know. And Costa and Strickland are pretty risky too. I didn't know why that fight was a 5-round fight. I didn't feel like it needed to be 5 rounds, even before knowing the outcome. Very strange. It's just a bigger man kind of thing. And by now it's like there's a lot of recognizable names at middleweight: Cannonier, Vettori, Strickland, Costa. You used to have Rockhold, Adesanya, Pereira, who's moved up, Duplessis. So there's a lot of really recognizable faces at middleweight. So it's probably another part of it, partially because so many of them have been in main events so many times. Hermanson as well, been in multiple UFC main events. Doesn't he realize two best divisions are 155 and 135? I don't know. And I would also make the argument of 125 as well and 145. If you're wanting to have an entertaining main event, personally, I would rather watch one of those, especially if it's at a smaller venue. It's almost is this stupid or what? Is this stupid? Going to a live event where you're like in a huge arena, is it easier to see middleweights, light heavyweights, and heavyweights in the cage than a strawweight or a flyweight? Perhaps. I know when I've been to UFC events, you can hear the heavyweights stepping around the cage, and it feels like there's a little bit of a like, oh man, I wonder what's going to happen. These are two huge guys, and they're physically bigger. You can hear them lumbering around the cage. So like maybe that's what the UFC thinks people are really interested in. I just think like play out the scenario for how this main event could go. Is it going to be entertaining? I don't think it's going to be like a good climax to the evening at all. But you might have been stretched too thin between UFC 300 and the summer slate to be able to put on a solid main event. I don't know. All right, guys. Really appreciate all of you. Stay tuned to MMA Ecosystem all weekend. Tons of content, articles, recaps, all that coming to the website. I'll have a video coming out in the next couple days, so look for that. Until next time, enjoy the fights.